July 2, 1965. Dearest Suzie, how are you and the boys getting along? Of course, we haven't gotten any mail in the last 3 days, so I haven't heard from you. We are still fighting the war as hard as ever. Up at 5 o'clock and finished about dark. Still no orders. Lit got his the other day. He is going to Fort Hood, Texas. We had a little excitement here yesterday morning that I'm sure you have heard about by now. The VC got right on the runway up here and bombed some of our planes. We didn't know anything about it, however, until we went out to work. It is so hot up here that you would never believe it. I can hardly wait to get back to Viet Cong. It is the rainy season there, so it should be cooler. It is so hot here that it is even miserable trying to sleep at night. We should be getting back to Viet Cong on the 7th. Do you know yet when you will be going back to Florida? When are you going to send me some slides? If you wait too much longer, you might as well forget about it. Well, news is short, so I will close for now. I love you and miss you all. It won't be long now. All my love, Bill. What I'm about to present to you is something that I wrote. There's not much to say about it, except that it is true. I hope you enjoy. Among the rolling clay hills of middle Georgia sits a tiny town. Once a thriving railroad community, now nothing more than an intersection of major country roads. Those born here only leave if they go to the military or prison. The liquor stores are closed on Sundays, and the townsfolk still know how to keep to their side of the railroad tracks when the sun goes down. They all, however, manage to present a polite smile and an accompanying nod when they pass each other down the aisles at the Pig. The talk of the town usually consists of pride for the newly opened McDonald's, family drama, most everyone was kin, or optimism towards the high school's football team that just might bring the county pride once again like they had back in '93. On the outskirts of this small town sits an old trailer which slid off its brick foundation years ago and is held together by nothing more than cheap wood and promises that things will get fixed in time, when money isn't so tight. Once the trailer was home to a tiny old man named Bill and his cute old wife named Sue. Bill was raised near the town and, like an elephant, had always insisted on moving back home to die, managing to do so only after the death of his mother and the subsequent purchase of her trailer. It was the last stop for the couple and contained all the contents that remained from their 55-year marriage, 4 boys, and many moves. Atop the TV stand in the den sat Bill's letter of appreciation from the president, a poster of a helicopter, and an intricately constructed model ship that he built once when his hands didn't seem to shake so much. The interior was carefully maintained by Sue, who vigilantly swept the perimeter for any streaky windows, crooked picture frames, or runaway dust bunnies. During the day, Sue often ventured into town, sometimes going to the flea market, hunting for treasures to surprise one of her many grandchildren with. Other times, she'd work at the hair salon and earn pennies on the dollar, or the occasional dye job to help conceal her age, by sweeping up hair and answering phones. On the way home, she was sure to stop at the gas station on the corner to stock up on cigarettes and scratch-offs. Bill typically split his time between watching TV in his small bedroom, playing slots on his computer in his even smaller office, or smoking some cigarettes on their front porch. He was no millionaire, but was inexhaustibly optimistic that the next lottery ticket would finally give him the title. He and Sue would have to make do with Social Security until then. At night, Sue stayed up late, watching Lifetime movies, and often spoiled herself with something sweet. She slept lightly, but often dreamt that she was either a little girl back in New Jersey with her brothers and sisters, or a young woman with 4 boys running around creating mayhem again. Bill would stay up late as he could to avoid sleep, but would inevitably fall prey to exhaustion. He typically had bad dreams, filled with abstract visions of red and green. The only people back in town who looked like the faces he would see in his nightmares ran the nail salon and said things like ain't and y'all through thick foreign accents. One summer, Bill and Sue's boys offered to bring their wives and kids to Georgia and celebrate the 4th of July as one big family. Only 3 of the 4 came, which surprised no one. Sue was especially happy to see 5 of her grandkids, all in one place, which had become increasingly rare since they left Florida. Though the many pillows and blankets occupying every conceivable soft surface seemed to make the trailer shrink in size, no one dared ask to join Popi in his bedroom. It was his, and everyone knew better than to bother him about it. The grandkids figured it might have been because it was closest to the front door and no one wanted to get between Bill and his hourly smokes. On the morning of Independence Day, the grandkids, dressed in their red, white, and blue Old Navy shirts, and the brothers began preparing the grill that was certain to operate until nightfall, sucking down beers as they went along. Bill mainly kept to his room, watching TV, looking forward to dinner, and enjoying his rest. The presence of his family was appreciated but quickly tired him. Sue and the wives made sure the kids were briefed on the necessity for safety during the holidays' festivities.
"You know what we should do?"
soloed a voice from the chorus of grandkids.
"We should try to plan a special celebration for Popi with the fireworks. He was a soldier and fought for our independence."
The rest of the choir fell in with odes of agreement. The kids spent the day coordinating who would launch what and when they would do it. All the while, Bill found time to fall asleep, at least until dusk turned to dark, and he was awoken by a loud familiar boom coming from just outside his window. "Dad, come on, we've been waiting for you," ordered one son from the hallway. He reluctantly shuffled outside to the thump of mortars jumping from their tubes and an army of crickets. Still disoriented from the nap, he almost believed he was back in the war. "What is that smell? Sulfur?" Bill thought to himself. "I've smelled that before, a long time ago. And the smoke hanging in the air, I can't see. Am I sure this isn't Nam?" Silhouettes danced in the night around him, illuminated by nothing more than the moon and stars. High-pitched laughter zigzagged through the air, and in his isolation, Bill could have sworn that it wasn't laughter at all, but instead the familiar wailing of a child in pain, alone in the dark. Laughter and tears had always sounded so similar anyway. His eyes anxiously jumped around the porch, landing on the BB gun the grandkids had been using earlier. "It's there if I need it," he thought. "I pray I won't."
"All right,"
a voice squeaked from the blackness.
"it's time to light off the big one."
A lighter flicked in the distance, and a spark frolicked down the fuse, disappearing only for a moment. There was an explosion, followed by another in the sky, which caused a bright light and loud crackle. The large family cheered while Bill stood on the porch, unable to move. His feet anchored to the decaying plywood. His ears rang, and he tried his best to stay upright. His breathing became deep and labored, worsened by another explosion.
"Popi!"
called one of the grandkids.
"Wasn't that cool?"
He cleared his throat, forcing out his words. "Yep, that was a big one," he shouted back. His sons yelled to each other, "Hey, watch this!" and started showing off everything else they brought for the occasion. Bill's head started spinning as the pops and bangs increased until they became a cacophony of white noise emanating from just beyond the safety of the porch. He felt fear again, a fear he hadn't genuinely felt in years. He contemplated clutching the gun to help hold himself up, and maybe... Suddenly, Bill heard gunshots in the distance and was instantly prepared to abandon his post on the porch and run for the security of his bedroom. His days of grabbing the helpless and carrying them to safety were long gone. The walls of his trailer were paper-thin, but better than the dangerously exposed position of the porch. There were actually gunshots, and they came from all sides of the property, the same way the bushes used to shoot at them on the bad nights. The small town was fervently patriotic, and besides their Veterans Memorial in the square that consisted of a hokey, carved wooden Statue of Liberty, the townsfolk celebrated their independence with real guns and big bonfires. The low glow of fires in the distance, through the trees, reminded Bill of those who used to camp just outside the walls of his base, taunting his company, letting them know that they were always there and in large numbers. Or were they? Bill refused to yield and stood his ground on the porch, declining every plea from his family to join them in the celebrations. He patiently waited. The night grew longer while the fuses grew shorter. He was insistent on serving, as he always had, this time as a grandfather. Through the flashbangs and flashbacks, he watched the whole show. With every "Thanks for your service, Popi," he responded with a hand wave and grunted, "You're welcome." He was in pain, but he didn't want anyone to know. Through that pain, he committed to making the kids happy. He had to make that sacrifice for them. It was his duty. When the grand finale ended and the neighbors ran out of ammo, all that was left for Bill to hear was the excitement of his family and the applause of the crickets. He was thankful the celebration was over, and after confirming that he was relieved of his duties, he walked back inside, grateful that he was brave enough to fight another battle, proud that he didn't have to call his oldest ally, Jim Beam, for help. The grandkids and sons cleaned up before going back inside.
I hope the celebration made Poppy happy. We planned all day and I'm so tired now,
said the youngest to the next youngest.
I'm sure it did,
she replied enthusiastically. I hope these kids appreciate all the sacrifices I've made for them. I'm so tired now, he thought, recovering in his room. At that moment, among the rolling hills and roaring crickets of the tiny, simple town, they didn't appreciate his sacrifice that night. They couldn't. They didn't even know about it. But that didn't matter because one day they learned about all his hopes and dreams and sacrifices and failures. Once they knew, there was no reason to ever worry if they appreciated the sacrifices Bill made, because in the end, they did. The photo I chose for today shows Popi sitting in his helicopter, doing something with ammo. It's a pretty cool photo. 6 July. Dearest Suzie, I'm sorry that I haven't written sooner, but this has been a long, hard week. I'm sure you must have heard about it. The past day has already been 36 hours long. We went out yesterday at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were on duty till 10 o'clock this morning. It is noon now. We've had time to eat and clean up, and we have to get back out at 4 o'clock this afternoon. With all the trouble they are having here, they told us we couldn't go back to Vinh Long, so we have been extended for 30 days. We are leaving here, though. We are going to stay at Quang Ngai for the next 30 days. That will be worse yet. We haven't had any mail since payday, and I don't know when we are going to get any. I hope you're getting my letters faster than I get yours. But I don't know what to do about Charlie. Bud Bender has been taking care of him this month, so I guess he will keep him for another month. Well, there's one good thing about it. Time flies up here, and when we do get back to Vinh Long, I will be so short that all I'll do is get ready to go home. Take care of yourself. I love you very much. Kiss the boys for me and say hello to everyone. All my love. Bill. In the first few days of 1965, in July, the Vietnam War began to change shape. Fast. What had long been framed in Washington as a limited engagement was becoming something far larger, with more boots on the ground, more nations involved, and a rising cost in lives. Back in Washington, one man was still trying to slow things down. On July 1st, Undersecretary of State George Ball sent a memo to President Johnson. In it, he warned that the Viet Cong, while supported by the North, were largely an indigenous movement, and that what the U.S. was calling a Cold War conflict was in truth a civil war. Ball was in the minority, and his dissent didn't change the course of action. But it's one of those moments that reads differently in hindsight, especially as that same week, U.S. troop numbers in combat operations were growing, almost daily. In Australia, July 1st marked the beginning of conscript training for Vietnam. Over 800,000 young men would register for national service during the war. For America's allies, too, the war was no longer theoretical. Meanwhile, the fighting in Vietnam was escalating quickly. That same day, a Viet Cong mortar and sapper attack hit Da Nang Air Base, destroying multiple American aircraft, which is something Popi mentions in a previous letter. South Vietnamese ARVN forces were stretched thin. In Tua Tien province, they responded to a Viet Cong attack and managed to push the attackers back, but casualties were mounting. In the Mekong Delta, an operation by the ARVN 21st Division led to the deaths of over 200 Viet Cong fighters. The next day, the VC counterattacked at Ba Giai. They rolled artillery straight up to the fort's perimeter and overran the position before air support could arrive. The ARVN lost more than 100 men. The air war was changing too. On July 4th, the Navy's A-6 intruder jet flew its first combat mission from the USS Independence, ushering in a new chapter of round-the-clock bombing runs. While the U.S. was escalating, so was the Soviet Union. On July 6, Moscow approved the deployment of 2,500 military instructors to North Vietnam. Their mission? Train the North Vietnamese forces to operate surface-to-air missiles, directly targeting American aircraft. Between July 6th and 9th, the U.S. 173rd Airborne Brigade swept through War Zone D alongside ARVN and Australian troops. The official tally reported dozens of Viet Cong killed and villages destroyed, but just a few days later, the New York Times began questioning how those body counts were calculated, pointing out the growing reliance on aerial estimates and the absence of physical confirmation. This period also brought losses that made headlines back home. Lieutenant Ronald Zinn, a West Point graduate and former Olympian, was killed in action in War Zone D while leading his platoon. His death underscored just how many of the young men being sent over there were athletes, students, and promising leaders, lost early in their lives. July 8th brought another turning point. Maxwell Taylor resigned as U.S. ambassador to South Vietnam. A longtime military advisor who had opposed sending in American ground troops, Taylor had lost that battle. He was replaced by Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. That same day, the U.S. government formally created the Vietnam Service Medal, a quiet acknowledgement that the advisory phase of the war was long over. But the violence wasn't slowing down. Outside Dao Tiang, Viet Cong forces ambushed an Arvin column. Over 100 South Vietnamese soldiers were killed, along with 4 American advisors. Nearly 200 others went missing. And on July 10th, the air war made history. 2 American F-4C Phantom jets shot down a pair of North Vietnamese MiG-17s, the first confirmed jet victories of the war. All of this political turmoil, international escalation, mounting casualties happened in less than 2 weeks. For the men on the ground, it likely felt like the pace of the war had quickened overnight. And for many families back home, July 1965 marked the first time the war felt inescapably real. The photo I chose for today appears to be somewhere that is not Vinh Long. It almost looks like it's in the mountains, perhaps taken where Popi is in this letter today. In the foreground, we see the pads that were used to create landing strips, and to the left, we see barrels of oil or gas. In the background is a crane, and possibly some radar or communications dishes behind the tree line. 8. July. Dearest Suzie, I still have not received any mail since the 1st. They keep saying that they are going to send our mail up, but I don't know when. Looks like they have forgotten us down here. I am too short to care anymore, though. I would sure like to get a letter from you, but I'm just hoping that no news is good news and that you are enjoying your vacation. I have moved again, and I'm all settled down for now, I guess, the next 30 days. Nothing is sure up here, though. We could go home tomorrow. That is why I don't want you to try to write me here. We live in a compound here, just like we had at Vinh Long, only there are only 4 pilots here. We have 2 armed ships up here, and we keep them parked outside the gate in an open field. That's for a fast getaway. The name of this place is Quang Ngai. The chow here is not too bad, but most of the time they are out of ice, which is the most important thing over here. The heat is almost unbearable. Yesterday I had a slight case of heat exhaustion and thought I would die. You get completely wet with sweat by 8 o'clock in the morning and stay that way all day long, and not a breeze anywhere. That is another reason I want to go to the beach for a week. I want to sit out on the front porch in the shade and feel that ocean breeze. I think I could just sit all day for a week like that. Of course, if I did that, I would be bored to death at night. So you might want to start now thinking of little games we could play at night to keep from getting bored. Let me know if you have any good ideas about that. This buddy of mine told me the other day that he wrote his wife and told her that if she wanted to be the first woman he got a hold of when he got home, she had better be at the bottom of the steps when he stepped off the plane. She wrote back and told him that if he ever wanted to be the first guy to get it, he better be the first one off the plane. Enough said. I still don't have my orders. Louis Litt is going to Fort Hood, just in case I didn't tell you before. They've got to come through soon, though. When I get back to Vinh Long, I will have less than 50 days. Flying is the same. We are still putting in a lot of hours. Well, tell my boys I love them and miss them and say hello to everyone for me. And take care of yourself. I love you very much. Sincerely, Bill. In today's letter, Popi is settling into Quang Ngai, his new post for what he assumes will be the next 30 days. He talks about the heat, the absence of mail, and how fast the days go when you're this short. Just 50 or so days left before he's headed home. It's one of his more playful letters. He writes about how he wishes he was sitting out on the porch with Suzie, feeling the breeze off the ocean, and when night falls, coming up with some little games they can play to pass the time so they won't get bored. It's coy, affectionate, and unmistakably flirtatious. Then there's the story he shares about another pilot who tells his wife, "You want to be the first woman I see when I get home, you better be at the bottom of the steps when I get off the plane." She then replies by saying, "If you want to be the first man to get it, you better be the first one off." These kinds of jokes carried a lot of weight for soldiers. They were reminders that desire still existed, that they were still tethered to love and intimacy and life outside the war. But sex and sexuality in Vietnam weren't just waiting at home, they were also very present in country, and that reality shaped the war in complex ways. This subject reminds me of 2 specific examples. In the 1974 documentary Hearts and Minds, there's a jarring scene filmed in a Saigon brothel. American soldiers lounge in rooms with young Vietnamese women joking and waiting for their turn. It's awkward and casual and deeply transactional. Some of the men smile at the camera, wave, or light cigarettes. The women look away. The filmmaker doesn't narrate over this scene. He just lets it sit. It forces the viewer to absorb the quiet violence of what's happening. Not a firefight, not a bombing run, but another kind of occupation. And in Phil Clay's short story, in Vietnam they had whores from his collection, Redeployment. A modern soldier reflects on the legacy of that earlier war as he experiences a strip club in a trailer near a base in the States. He talks about how sex, specifically with Vietnamese women, became not just an outlet for stress, but a kind of myth, passed down in stories and rumors. The story's title isn't casual. It's a bitter nod to how soldiers in Vietnam were sometimes envied by later generations for the perceived access they had to sex and how much of that memory has been filtered through bravado, guilt, or both. In reality, prostitution was widespread in Vietnam. Some estimates suggest tens of thousands of Vietnamese women worked in the sex trade during the war, many out of economic desperation, others through outright coercion. The military tried, half-heartedly, to regulate it with off-limit zones, venereal disease checks, and education campaigns. But for the most part, sex was treated like a necessary part of the war machine, something the men needed, something no one wanted to talk about too deeply. But the emotional landscape was more complicated than that. For many soldiers, sex was about proximity to something human, a break in the fear, the monotony, the brutality. Sometimes it was exploitative, sometimes it was deeply sad, and sometimes, rarely, it became a real connection. Popi doesn't write about any of that directly, but there's a through line here. His longing for Suzie isn't just romantic. It's physical, it's playful, it's real. And the letter holds that tension. He wants her, he misses her, and he's counting the days. The tension was shared by tens of thousands of men, many of whom weren't married, many of whom didn't write letters home. For those men, desire didn't go away. It just adapted to war. The photo I chose for today appears to be taken from the inside of the Officers Club. There are Vietnamese women dancing in sparkling dresses with an American clapping alongside them. It is presumably nighttime. I think it's easy to figure out what is going on here. July 13. Dearest Suzie, we finally got some mail this morning. I got 6 letters from you, one from Mom and one from Laverne. You can imagine I was about to go out of my mind worrying about you. I'm still worried about you. I hope by now your cyst is gone. That is a terrible thing to have to put up with. I just wished I was home to look out for you. This turned out to be a hell of a vacation for you, but no matter, we will try for a real vacation when I get home. Maybe by then the boys will all be well and you'll be well too. We are still going strong up here. We put in a lot of hours every day, and I am sure it is going to be that way the rest of the time we are up here. I still don't have any orders. The rumor is that everybody who doesn't have them by now had orders for the 11th. Then they did away with the 11th, so our orders had to be changed. That is why it takes so long. I wouldn't mind going back to Benning, but I hate the thought of all that field training. Anyway, I should get some news soon. If nothing happens, I should be walking in the door sometime on the 27th of September. Up until now, everybody has been going home up to 2 weeks early, but they put a stop to that. Now you cannot leave until 24 hours before 1 year is up, so there is no chance of getting out early. Anyway, that isn't long off. If you can get along on your $400 a month till I come home, I would like to keep those extra checks. I have a surprise in store for you. If you need them, just tell me and I'll send them to you, but I figured with the car paid for, you were probably doing okay. When you do get home, don't bother to send me any slides. I will be too short by then. You could have sent me more pictures, though. Well, I have to go back to work, so I will close for now. I love you very much and miss you. Kiss the boys for me. All my love. Bill. In today's letter, Popi is counting down the days. He's short, less than 80 days left in country, and he's imagining what it'll be like to walk through the front door of his home again. He writes that if all goes to plan, he'll be home by September 27th. But even as he says it, there's a touch of skepticism. Nothing is sure up here, he says. That uncertainty wasn't just about the war, it was baked into the very process of going home. For soldiers in Vietnam, going home wasn't as simple as stepping onto a plane. It began with a number, Deros, the date eligible for return from overseas. That 1-year clock started ticking the moment a soldier arrived in country, and once it dropped into double digits, a person's very identity shifted. You weren't just a soldier, you were short. Guys marked their status on helmets, walls, and even calendars scrawled onto cardboard. Being short came with a particular kind of hope and fear. You were almost done, but not quite safe. Unlike earlier wars where whole units rotated together, Vietnam used an individual rotation system. Units stayed in place while soldiers came and went one by one. That meant Bill wasn't going home with his whole company. He'd likely be replaced by someone just arriving, and maybe, if there was time, He'd help show that replacement the ropes. This kind of informal handoff was common. Short-timers passing down knowledge, terrain familiarity, local customs, and of course, survival tips. These last few weeks were often the most dangerous. Not necessarily because of enemy fire, but because short-timers were so focused on making it out alive, they could slip up, take risks, or let their guard down. Then came the waiting game. Orders could be delayed or changed at the last minute. Popi mentions a rumor that his were tied up because of the disbandment of the 11th, and he's probably right. Red tape was constant, and rumors often spread faster than official word. Once a soldier got his departure orders, he'd begin the journey home. He might fly out of a major base like Cam Ranh Bay, Da Nang, or Long Bin, usually on a C-130 or C-141 transport plane. His first stop was often somewhere like Okinawa, Guam, or the Philippines. These were the in-between places, transit hubs where soldiers ate standard rations, dozed in temporary barracks, and waited for the next flight out. For many, it was their first time sleeping without gunfire or helicopters in the background. But the quiet could feel surreal, like a dream not yet real. Before leaving Asia entirely, soldiers went through final medical checks, blood work, immunizations, x-rays. Anyone seriously wounded or sick was moved through the aeromedical evacuation system, heading for hospitals in the States. Everyone else waited for the flight back to the U.S., the one that would finally take them home. When their plane landed on American soil, usually at a place like Travis Air Force Base or McChord in Washington, the moment was electric. Some were met by family, others moved quietly through the system, assigned to out-processing bases like Fort Benning, Fort Lewis, or Fort Bragg. There they turned in equipment, filed paperwork, sometimes received new orders, and, for those leaving the military altogether, began the process of separation. The Army had services in place, briefings on benefits, GI Bill access, job counseling, but for many soldiers, those few days weren't enough. They'd been at war. They were used to heat, adrenaline, fear, and routine. Now they were being dropped back into grocery stores, traffic lights, and silence. For the lucky ones, there was a warm welcome. But many came home to indifference, or worse, hostility. And almost all returned with memories they couldn't yet process, because at the time, there wasn't a word like PTSD in circulation. There was just the war, and everything after. The photo I chose for today shows little girls buying produce on a street from an old woman. This is a sight that may have been familiar for Popi, perhaps reminding him of home, further intertwining his civilian life with his life overseas. July 1965. Dearest Suzie, I'm sorry that I haven't written sooner, but we have been very busy. The VC are real active lately and they keep us hopping. I got another letter from you today and was glad to hear that you were all right. I hope by now you are over your sickness. I hope too that Minnie is getting along okay. I assume she is in the hospital now. What did Minnie have to say about Billy and Brian going to a Baptist Bible school? Have you decided yet when you are going back to Florida? Not that I care. As far as I'm concerned, you have 60 days to get home. Things are the same over here. It is hot as hell, and nobody will tell us when we can go back to Viet Cong. And I still don't have orders. The reason I don't have orders, by the way, rumor, is everybody who had orders for the 11th Air Assault Division had to have them changed because they are coming over here. So that is some consolation if it is true. I won't have to go back to the 11th. Well, I will close for now. Please don't worry about me or think I love you less when I don't write every day. I love you and miss you very much. Kiss B, B, and B for me. Love you. Bill. For some in the Vietnam War, religion took on a powerful role, both as solace and as service. Near the Viet Cong Air Base, Irish Catholic nuns from the Sisters of St. Paul of Chartres ran the Good Shepherd Convent, an orphanage and vocational center for young girls. It was staffed by 5 Irish sisters alongside Vietnamese and Malay nuns. This small community endured mortar attacks and neighborhood tension. Some of the students had even suffered under VC control, but the sisters remained at their posts, serving displaced children and maintaining dignity despite war's encroachment. This convent wasn't an isolated case. The Catholic Church in South Vietnam, historically linked to French colonialism and the pro-West Diem regime, had become deeply rooted by the 1960s, supported by migratory waves of Catholics fleeing the North after 1954. Though tensions erupted during the Buddhist crisis of 1963, by the mid-war period, churches and convents continued to serve as community lifelines, providing education, healthcare, vocational training, and temporary shelter for refugees. American soldiers encountered this reality in subtle and meaningful ways. Chaplains, whether they be Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, were fixtures on most bases. They conducted services, counseled men at night, and sometimes flew out to aid the wounded. Their presence offered spiritual grounding amid chaos and loss. Some soldiers found comfort in routine rituals or personal prayer. Others abandoned faith entirely. But whether overt or hidden, faith remained a tether, a refuge during uncertainty. Back home, faith circulated through prayer chains, church groups, and mail calls. A wounded or sick spouse like Suzie would hear from neighbors or local congregations daily. For families of deployed soldiers, churches were both social anchors and spiritual havens. They embroidered kindness into care packages, held vigils, and helped pass the long hours until letters arrived. Behind the nuns' quiet labor, American troops' personal prayers and community, solidarity back home, there lay a deeper current, the spiritual landscape of Vietnam itself. Catholicism, brought by Jesuits and Franciscans in the 16th century, had evolved in conjunction with native folk beliefs. While Catholics numbered around 4 to 7% of the population, the national story was one of religious plurality, including Buddhism, ancestor worship, and syncretic traditions. Under Diem, Catholicism flourished, but minorities often navigated government favoritism and spiritual persecution. For Vietnamese Catholics, the war and faith were intertwined. Each shelling, each refugee, each orphan carried a silent testimony. The Irish sisters of Vinh Long lived that testimony, remaining steadfast amid bullets and uneasy nights. Their ministry, including the vocational center and orphanage, represented hope and resilience in a fractured country. For American soldiers, like Bill, religion wasn't always a practice act, but it was a constant undercurrent. Whether in private prayer, a Sunday service, a handwritten letter, or a quiet reflection in the jungle, faith helped them bear the burdens of fear, homesickness, and the moral weight of war. And for some of the women at home, faith was the heart fire that kept them steady day by day. We already know that Meemaw's Catholic and Popi was a Baptist. She told us that in her interview. Meemaw's family in New Jersey, where she was visiting at the time of this letter, are all deeply religious and still are today. In fact, her brother is even a deacon in their church. Poppy's family was Baptist and typically spiritual in their own way. His mentioning of Min's reaction to the boys going to the Baptist Bible school was playful, but also an implicit recognition of the differences in culture between Meemaw's northern roots and Poppy's southern heritage. Though he wasn't Catholic himself, his proximity and relationship with the nuns may have made him feel comfortable, reminding him of his wife back home and her faith. The photo I chose for today is an aerial photo of a large church or cathedral. Poppy also has photos that appear to be the same building under construction. 22 July. Dearest Suzie, please excuse my red pen. I can't seem to keep a decent pen anymore. I got another letter from you today. Glad to find out that you are enjoying your vacation in spite of all the trouble you've had since you left home. How is Minnie getting along? I imagine that by the time you get this letter, she will be home again. I hope she is getting along okay. Things are the same over here. We are still living out of a duffel bag. We still have no idea how long we will have to stay up here. I still don't have orders either. I don't know what to do about them. They have to get here soon. Things have been pretty quiet the past couple of days, but we have a big operation tomorrow. We have 0530 takeoff. Say hello to everyone up there for me and kiss Billy, Brian, and Brett for me. I love you all very much and can hardly wait for the next 62 days to go by. Let's see. Time you get this, it will be about 56 days. How about that? I can stand on my head that long. I love you. Bill. In this letter, Poppy mentions almost casually that he and his comrades are still living out of a duffel bag. That simple line is more than a detail. It connects deeply with centuries of military life and a particular kind of survival. In the 18th and 19th centuries, American soldiers carried everything in haversacks, over-the-shoulder canvas or leather pouches holding rations, ammunition, and a few personal items. During the Civil War, troops would strap blankets or greatcoats on top, transforming their sacks into a rolling bundle of identity and purpose, ultimately becoming all that they had to survive. Anything they couldn't carry, they would have to scavenge or take. Fast forward to World War I and II, packs grew larger and more functional. The U.S. Army introduced the M1910 and later M1941/1945 backpack systems, complete with internal frames and pouches for gas masks, mess kits, and supplies. The sacks became more planned and weight became a major consideration. Meanwhile, the Barrack M1929 duffel bag, initially made of blue denim, emerged as the first standard barracks bag, used for transporting clothing and personal gear. By World War II's later years, the canvas duffel evolved into this barrel style. Olive drab military duffel bag, cylindrical, drawstring topped with a circular bottom and external shoulder strap. Soldiers stenciled their names or serial numbers on it, padlocking it to protect what few personal treasures they possessed. In Vietnam, Popi's duffel bag was the evolution of all those systems. A sturdy, round canvas cylinder brimming with socks, photos, letters from Suzie, toothbrushes, perhaps a paperback Bible, or even a deck of cards to play pinochle with. His living space wasn't a bunk or tent or his officer's quarters he had back in Vinh Long, but that traveling sack, always ready for orders, always ready to move. Every item inside carried meaning. A photo of his boys meant connection, a letter meant reassurance, clean socks meant comfort. The sack was his world and a place without stability. He likely didn't unpack it. Each time the mission or location changed, the duffel bag went with him, packed, repacked, always ready. And yet, even today's soldiers followed the same tradition. Though their gear is modernized, in the late 60s, the U.S. introduced M1956 and the nylon M1967 load-carrying equipment to better fit Vietnam's climate. Later systems would further refine mobility and organization. But all that innovation traces back to this rolling duffel bag. For Popi, that duffel was more than just a bag. It was a symbol. It held his past, his present, and his hope for the future. It was rugged, personal, protective, and entirely essential, and a place defined by impermanence and danger. Though most of his things were still in Vinh Long or already on their way to the United States, taking months to arrive by boat, he always had his essentials on him. So when he says we are still living out of a duffel bag, he's not just telling Suzie where his gear is. He's revealing the texture of his life. Mobile, fragile, tethered, and tethering. One canvas loop at a time. The photo I chose for today shows Popi and 3 of his friends on a wet tarmac. The sky is overcast. They have bags in between them all. All but Popi are looking at the camera. There's a chance this wasn't from Vietnam. The trees in the back and the car to the right look to be American, but who knows? Either way, these men are clearly about to move. 24 July. Dearest Suzie, I received a letter from you today saying that you were going home in a week, and that letter is over a week old, so I don't know where to write to you, so as of now, I'm writing all of them to Florida. If you aren't there to get them, then they will just have to pile up. Things are the same over here. I have today off, which is real unusual. Of course, I don't know what to do with myself. I talked to a guy from Vinh Long last night. I still don't have any orders. Charlie is getting along all right, and that is all the news from there. We are supposed to leave here on the 8th of August. I sure hope we do. In fact, if we don't get back soon, I won't have time to send Charlie home. That is another reason I'm anxious to get my orders, too. If I get orders for some place where there is a lot of cold weather, I will get rid of him. Cold weather would kill him. I guess you could have probably heard that the 10 Air Assault Division is coming over here. It is the 11th. They have changed the name to the 1st Air Cav Division, but it is the same outfit. Well, I hope that you had a good, safe trip home. I bet the boys are glad to be home. I love you all and miss you very much. All my love. Bill. When Popi mentions the arrival of the 10th Air Assault Division, soon reflagged as the 1st Air Cav Division, it might sound like a small footnote, a passing reference in a letter home. But behind that name was a seismic shift in how the United States Army planned to fight the Vietnam War. I've spoken about it previously, about this division, but I want to go a bit more in depth here. Officially ordered to deploy on July 29, 1965, the 1st Air Cav Division, Air Mobile, was built from the experimental 11th Air Assault Division, or the 10th as Popi says. As we've previously discussed, it was the first full-scale air mobile force the U.S. military had ever fielded, one which based many of its tactics on the experiences that those in the 114th and other aviation companies like it had early in the war. By August 1st, nearly 16,000 soldiers and more than 400 helicopters, including UH-1 Hueys, CH-47 Chinooks, and CH-54 Skyscrans, were en route to Camp Radcliffe, nestled in the dusty hills of An Khie and Vietnam's Central Highlands. Their mission was revolutionary in its simplicity. Mobility. Using helicopters, the Army could insert infantry, artillery, medevac teams, and supplies into dense jungle terrain in minutes instead of days. This meant soldiers no longer relied on long overland marches or predictable base-to-base movement. Now, fire teams could drop directly into a village, a mountaintop, or a rice paddy and just as quickly be extracted. By October, the full division was operational, and in November, they were tested in one of the most important early battles of the war, the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. On November 14th, Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore and the 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, around 450 men, were flown into landing zone X-ray at the foot of the Chu Pong Massif. They were immediately surrounded by thousands of North Vietnamese troops. The Americans held their ground for 3 brutal days, relying on artillery and helicopter gunships to hold the perimeter. When the fighting subsided, the U.S. reported a lopsided casualty ratio, claiming nearly 10 enemy deaths for every American loss, but the cost of mobility became clear just days later. On November 17th, the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry moved toward a new landing zone, Albany, where they were ambushed in dense jungle. Lacking clear sight lines and with limited air support, the battalion suffered catastrophic losses, more than 150 killed, 120 wounded. It was one of the deadliest ambushes of the war. El Drang was a turning point. It proved that helicopters could reshape the battlefield, but it also showed their limitations. The Air Cav had introduced a lethal combination of speed and flexibility, but when that mobility collided with North Vietnamese close combat tactics, it became a double-edged sword. For U.S. military planners, El Drang validated the air mobile concept and launched a rapid expansion of helicopter-based warfare throughout Vietnam. For the North Vietnamese, it offered a lesson in how to adapt, fight up close, ambush supply lines, and neutralize the American air advantage by forcing engagements in tight terrain. After El Drang, the 1st Air Cavalry Division remained at the heart of the war. They fought in the Pleiku campaign, ran deep operations, and helped write the doctrine of air mobile warfare that's still studied today. So when Bill hears the Air Cav is arriving, he's not just talking about a new unit. He's likely sensing the war shifting underneath him, becoming more like the one he knows, but for everybody else. More movement, more unpredictability, more heat from above, and more risk below. As I've stated before, my uncle swears Popi interacted with these guys, was in El Drang, mentioned in Moore's book, and is standing alongside Mel Gibson in the movie adaptation of the battle. That isn't true, of course, but it is an example of the myths created about his service. Just like my dad's skepticism that Popi may have been in the CIA, my uncle was sure that his father was a hero, his actions profound enough to be immortalized on the silver screen. You have to wonder why we tell ourselves these stories. Do we have to derive some sort of particularly special meaning from our loved ones' suffering? Is it easier to undergo the trauma caused by them if it was worth something to the greater good? Perhaps we made a mistake in our understanding decades ago, and are just too stubborn to change our minds about what really happened. Can you think of anything like this in your family, or with your own experiences? The photo I chose for today shows helicopters lined up on an airbase. The ground below them is littered with potholes. It is damaged. The helicopters are all Hueys, and they have white stars on their sides denoting that they belong to the Army. I'm Alex Lowy, and I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of Dearest Suzie, and receiving messages from the past that my Popi wrote exactly 60 years ago. I sincerely appreciate your time and interest. Please consider following the podcast on your preferred platform, and if you're enjoying it, I kindly ask that you take the time to rate the show and leave a review. Also, please follow the project on YouTube, X, and Instagram. All likes, comments, shares, and reviews will help grow the reach of this story. The links for these things should be in the description of this episode. Please feel free to email me at dearestsuziepodcast@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to say. I'd love to chat or to hear about your stories as well. Thank you for listening, and God bless.